Hello everybody, my name is Ben McCallum and today I'm going to take you through all of the basics you need to know to do basic Photoshops, and this is basically a course for people which have never used Photoshop before, so we're going to take you through the steps and show you how to use the tools which are in the software. So the very first thing we're going to do is obviously open up Photoshop. Now what I'm planning on doing today is we're going to take a photo from here. This is a shot I've just taken at the local zoo. There is a link below, you can click on that and it will download a version of this so you can follow along when we get to this point. And we're going to make the image, we're going to turn it from something like this into something like that. So we're going to be going through and using all of the basic tools. We won't be getting to this image straight away, we'll start with something a little bit simpler just to show you all of the tools and how they work, and then we'll progress and we'll get to a point where we start to edit this photograph to what you see in front of us right now. So I'm just going to close both of those so that they're gone and out of the way. And when you open up Photoshop, you're probably going to have a screen which looks something very similar to this. Now, there are different variations depending on which software version you're using. This could be all white and light gray, or it could be a dark color. There are options within the preferences, but we won't go into that. Let's just go straight into actually how to use Photoshop. So the first thing we're going to do, we're going to come up to File and we're going to say New. We're going to be creating a new file. Now this is quite an important section because this defines how your project will look. Now one of the big things you need to know is the resolution. Now resolution in terms of computer screens and TV screens is around 72 dpi. Now if you're planning on doing a project and you're planning to send it to print, you need to have that up higher with, I'd say, a minimum of 200 pixels. But for this case, we'll just leave it at this to keep the file size small. Now you'll notice we also have this section which says Preset. Now it gives you a big variation of list of things that you can choose. You've got the US paper sizes, international paper sizes, standard photo sizes, and all of the like. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to just go to the international paper size and just go on A4. And we're going to click OK. Now you'll see that it's come up with a white board in front of us. Now this is it is your working space, but it can also be referred to as the canvas. Now you don't really need to know that too much, but if I say canvas, this is what I'm referring to. I'm referring to the work area that we're working within. Now the other thing that you may have noticed when this came up is we also had it come up in the side panel here. Now this represents basically a small version of what's happening over here. I'm going to refer back to this area quite regularly, so just keep an eye on the mouse. When it comes over to this point, I'm going to be demonstrating something. So the very first thing is let's go through the tools and see what's here. So starting up here on the left at the very top, now if you don't have these options here, what I'm going to show you is if I get to a section within this tutorial and you don't have a particular window, come up to the Windows section here and there is a big list of all of the different windows that you can choose that will turn them on and off and bring them up within your screen. I'm not going to go through and tell you which each one are. If something is missing, I just say quickly go through and click a few things and it'll pop up or it won't. So the very first tool that we have here is the Move tool. Now, that's fairly straightforward, it moves things around. When we come down to the next one, anything which has a little arrow in the bottom right hand side, if you hold the mouse down, it will come up with a selection of things that you can choose. Now, this particular tool is a selection tool. You've either got a square, circle, and a couple of other different variations underneath. For the ease of this one, we'll just start with the square one, and it really is, it's a matter of click and drag, and it will select an area. The next section under that is another version of a selection tool, but this one here goes where you basically draw. So it will then give you the selection there, and there are a few more options underneath it, so rather than it being a where you draw, you can go from point to point to choose particular areas. And when you come up and it comes up with a little circle underneath your thing, it's going to close that area off. So we'll just leave that one there for the moment as well. You come down, you've got other variations of selection tools. They basically do the same thing, but we won't go through them just yet. I just want to talk about the basics. So this one here is your crop tool. Again, I'm going to hold this down and it gives you a few different variations, but I'm going to recommend you just stick to the crop tool, the basic one at the top, and that is effectively a version which will trim the image down. Now you'll see it's locked into a particular aspect ratio. You can come up to this ratios section and you can choose all kinds of different sizes, or you can put a custom one in. I'm just going to push escape because we don't want to do that right now. So coming down further, you have a bunch of other tools which you probably won't use very regularly, so I'm not going to go into those. We have in here, we have spot healing tools. These are really good for skin smoothing out and getting rid of blemishes on skins. This one underneath that is the brush tool. It is exceptionally handy. It will come up with variations of things that you can use, different shaped brushes, etc. And we'll go through the rest of these as we get to them. So these are really, the top ones are selection, the next ones are sort of creation and editing, and the ones below that are more creation and editing as well. So the very first thing that I'm going to do is we're going to do something very basic, and we're going to create basically just a solid object, and then we're going to put text over it. I'm trying to keep it simple so that you can go step by step and follow me along the way. So I'm going to come down to the very bottom area here, and I'm going to click on this one which comes up with all different shapes. I'm just going to click on the rectangle one. Now you have up the top here, it's changed the area, the tool area, to have different functions. We've got the fill, which will be the inside section of the shape. So let's just click on that and we'll just choose a color which is really obvious. We'll go red. And it's got this one which says stroke. Now stroke within Photoshop is effectively a border. So let's click on that and we'll choose a blue color. And the 3 points is basically the size of the border that you get. So we're going to click and drag, and we're going to have our object which has been made there. Now, what I want to show you, that's popped up, we don't really need to worry about that. What I want to show you now is, if you have a look over on your right hand side where I pointed out before, you'll notice that another little section has popped up. Now, the reason for this is Photoshop works in a thing called layers. Now, what layers enable you to do is create objects on their own so that they're editable at a later date. So basically anything which is higher up on the list will have precedence over the layers below, so it will show up first. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to come over here, I'm going to click on the text layer to prove this point. I'm going to click on text, I'm going to just drag and drop, and you'll see this is our color again up the top here. We'll just type in snow because we're going to be doing a snow leopard. And what I'm going to do, I'm going to come up to the left hand top and click on the move bar. I'm going to move it up. So we now have snow over the top of the box. Now if we come over to this layers area, you'll notice that the word snow and its layer is above the rectangle. If I grab that layer and drag it down, it will disappear. That's because it is lower down on the hierarchy of layers, and it is effectively being hidden by the layer which is above it. So you need to work within the layers, and if you're working as layers, you can continue to edit things and chop and change, and you won't be doing any damage to the actual images. Now, if you had done this in another way, I'm going to get rid of both of these layers. I'm going to click on that, and I'm going to click on that one. I'm just going to click delete so that I get rid of them. If we'd done this a separate way, I'm going to click on the selection tool and choose rectangle. I'm going to drag and drop. So I now have this section selected, and I'm working on the background layer. So I'm only working on a single layer. I'm going to come over here, and there's a tool called gradient tool, and there's also another one called paint bucket. We want paint bucket. So I'm going to click on that. And if we go down below, we have two little colors here. They're two little squares. Effectively, these refer to the foreground color and the background color. I'm not going to get into the foreground and background too much. We're just going to treat these as two color tables. So I'm going to double click on the white. I'm going to come up and I'm going to choose my red color that I want and click OK. Now this paint bucket basically just splashes. If there's a single color, it will just change that to that color that we've selected. Now you'll notice, I'm just going to click on the move bar so that I can show you something in a second, you'll notice that over in our background area, we no longer have the ability to move that on its own plane because it's been put on the same layer as the background. So we can't move that. The reason why I wanted to show you this is because you need to know to begin working Photoshop initially using layers and creating new layers so that you can move objects around and you're not getting a single layer which can't later be edited, because you will no longer be able to move this layer around. The better way to do this, I'm going to just go backwards, ignore what I've done there. Or don't say ignore actually. Basically, if you want to go backwards, if you are on a Mac, you will hold down Command, Option, and Z, and you'll just keep pushing Z until it goes back to a point that you're happy with. The ideal scenario when working in Photoshop is to create new layers for every object you're making. So in this case, I'd come down and there's a bunch of little logos at the bottom here. You want to go to the one next to the garbage can, and that is a new layer. So I'm going to click on that and you'll see it's come up and it says Layer 1. I'm going to double click on Layer 1 and I'm just going to call it Red Square. I know it's a rectangle, but I wanted to write square. Now, if we repeat the same process and I create the same red square that I did a moment ago, you'll notice that it's on its own layer. Now, the benefits of having it on its own layer means that I can grab that layer and I can move it anywhere that I want and it won't affect the rest of the image because it's its own object. So that is the basics for using layers, is so that you can continue to edit and you can keep adding things upon other things, and you can come back and you can delete, say you don't want that rectangle there anymore, you can simply delete it and it won't affect any of the other layers. So that is basically one of the tools that you're going to be needing to get your head around, is using the layers. From there, we'll go on to doing a little bit more in-depth things. So what I'm going to do now, I'm going to move on to the photo of that snow leopard, and hopefully you'll download that and you can follow me step by step, and we'll get there very shortly. Okay, so now we've opened up the snow leopard photo and we're going to go through and make the image look more lifelike, and it's going to have more color and it's going to bounce a lot more than it does at the moment. What I'm going to do is introduce you to adjustment layers, which enable you to affect a photograph without it being permanent. So you can go back and do those adjustments at a later date and it won't really do too much damage to the image because you can delete it when you want and the image will go back to normal. So if we come over to this layers area where we've got our background selected and we come down to the little circle which has a half color, that is the adjustments section. We're going to click on that and we're going to come up to the one which says curves. Now when I click on that, you'll notice that it brings up a histogram up here, but it also creates its own layer in here. What a curves adjustment does is enable you to adjust basically the colors which are in the photograph. In this case, we're going to be dealing with the highlights and the shadows, so basically the bright parts and the dark parts. This histogram works on basically a gradient scale. So the bottom left area is the blacks and the top right area is the whites. If I grab closer to the bottom left and bring it down, it will make the dark areas darker. If I push it the opposite direction, it makes the dark areas lighter, and vice versa with the top. If I do that, it will bring it one way. If I go the other way, it makes it brighter. So in this case, I want to make the darks a little bit darker so that it's got a little bit more detail and a little bit more contrast to it. I want the middle areas to stay about the same, and I wanted the highlights to be a little bit brighter. I'm going to get rid of that because we don't need to see that for the moment. Now that that has been done, you can see the effects that have been done to the entire photograph. The next thing that we want to do is create a little bit more color to the whole area because I think it looks a little bit flat. So I'm going to come back down to our adjustments layer area. I'm going to click on that, and we have a couple of selections here. We have the saturation and hue tool, but we also have the vibrance tool. If you've used previous software, a lot of things say the saturation tool, and that's what you use to increase the color. I would recommend you use the vibrance because it does it a little bit more realistically than using the saturation. So I'm going to click on the vibrance tool. I'm going to come up, and it's going to actually show you that you can do the vibrance and the saturation. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you what happens when you increase saturation. Is the colors start to go quite unrealistic and they're kind of over the top. I'll put that back to 0. Whereas if you use the vibrance tool, it increases those colors, but it doesn't do it to the same extent. It gives you more sort of information, but it doesn't go crazy. So we'll close that again. Now, the next thing you're going to notice is that this image is quite sort of orangey. The white balance isn't brilliant, and we've taken the photo so that in a raw format you could fix this, but I've left it like this for Photoshop so that we can use another tool which is called a photo filter. Again, we're going to come down to the adjustments layer. I'm going to come up to the section which says photo filter. I'm going to click on that, and it gives you a list of options that you can choose. Now, we want to go for a cooling filter to make it look a little bit more neutral and not quite as orange. So we're going to click on that, and you're going to notice that it's put a blue haze over the entire area. This can be adjusted by obviously using the density scale and decreasing it so the effect is being a little bit less. So let's increase that just a little bit. I'm going to say about 15, and you're going to notice that it's made it a little bit less orange. And if we turn this layer on and off by using the little eyeball tool next to it, you'll notice the difference in which it has made. Now, the next step that I want to do is I want to make these eyes jump a little bit more so that we've got more detail in those eyes, and it really gives the image a little bit more mood. Now, one of the greatest ways to do this is to use the existing colors which are already in this image and basically multiply them above the one which is already there. Now, to do this, I'm going to click on the background layer. I'm going to right click and say duplicate layer. This one here I'm going to call eyes. You'll notice that it's created the layer directly above the other one. Now, when you're making layers within Photoshop, there are a few different types of layers that you can have. It doesn't really mean that it's setting the layer to this permanently. You can go back and change them whenever you like. It basically changes the way that this layer will affect the layers below. When it's on normal, it means that it's 100% opacity, and it basically just goes directly over the top and you can't see the layer below. If you choose things like multiply, you'll see that it increases the effect of the colors and basically darkens the image. We'll go through, and the one that I want to go to at the moment is screen, because I want to make these eyes pop out a little bit more. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to use the thing called a mask. What the masks allow us to do is select a specific area of the photograph and only show that area. So by coming down to underneath the area of the layers and clicking on the area which has the square with the hole cut out of it, it's going to create a mask. Now, this mask is effectively the little white area next to the layer that you've got. Anything which is shown in white is visible. Anything which is shown in black is hidden. So what we're going to do is I'm going to hold the command button and I'm going to push I. That is going to change the whole area of this so that it's black, because I'm only going to want a very small section of this layer that we've created to be visible. Now, we're going to bring up our brush tool, and we're going to come over to the colors section over here, and we're going to make sure that we're choosing white, because white areas that you paint in will be visible, black areas will not be visible, and anything which is in the grayscale anywhere in between will be a version of opacity, so it will basically be a scaled version of how much is visible. So we're going to make sure that we've got the white section selected, we've got our brush selected, and we've not only got our layer selected, but we have to make sure that it's not the image, but the mask that we're dealing with. So I'm going to zoom in. I'm going to push Command and the plus button. If you're on a PC, again, I'm pretty sure it is the Control and plus button. To increase the brush size, I'm going to use the brackets tool. I'm going to come back up to my brush tool over here, and I'm just going to make sure that there's a little bit of softness so that it's not a completely hard brush. Now I'm going to come in here quite close. I'm going to decrease the size of my brush, and I'm going to paint in the area that I want to be shown. So we've got one eye here. I'm going to come over, and we're going to do the same thing again right there. So we now have brighter eyes within the photograph. Now, in this case, I feel as though that is too bright. So to make sure that the layer that we're dealing with, this layer that we've just created, isn't being used to its full effect, you can decrease the opacity, which means it starts to become a little bit see-through. So I'm going to click on this area which says 100%, and on the sliding scale, I'm just going to bring that down until I think it looks sort of a little bit more appropriate. So I'm going to leave that at 85. And by turning the layer on and off using the eyeball, you'll be able to see the difference that it's made to the eyes within this image. The next thing that I want to do is I want to say that this image here, I want the leopard to have blue eyes. I don't want it to be this sort of the creamy orange color. I want them to be blue. So we've already gone through, we've made these curves adjustments, the vibrance adjustments, and the photo filter adjustments. I'm going to create another one, but I want it to be just above the eyes section. So make sure that I'm going to click on the eyes. I'm going to come down to our adjustment layers again. I'm going to come to one which says hue and saturation. Now, again, it's going to bring up this selection tool here. But before I do that, I'm going to repeat the same process. I'm going to make sure that the mask that I've selected, I'm going to invert it by pushing Command I or Control I for those on PC. So my mask is now gone. And I'm just going to do a very rough job of painting in where I want to see, and you'll notice over on the mask you will see a small section turn up. But if you can't tell what you're doing, a little hint is if you use the backslash button, which is just above the return button, it brings up basically a red area which shows you what's being painted and what hasn't been painted. So anything which is red is effectively invisible, anything which you can see is visible. So just have to make sure that you've got the right brush selected. I'm going to turn that off again with the backslash. We can come back and we can fix that up very shortly. Now what you'll notice is it's brought up within our properties bar here. It's gone straight to the mask section because I've chosen the mask. If I click over here, it will jump back to the selection of the tools that you're going to use. The other option is to just simply click between the two with the area up here. So I'm going to zoom back in. By holding the space bar down, I can move the image around. But we want to make these eyes so they're a little bit blue. So I'm going to grab this hue saturation. I'm going to slowly change it around until the eyes have matched a color that I want. Now that looks pretty good to me. I do quite like that blue. Let's just try the other end of the spectrum. Sometimes you have to wait until your computer can get up to speed. So that's looking pretty good to me. We'll just go with that color. So I'm going to close that window down. I'm going to come back to my mask layer. I'm going to zoom in again. But this time, I'm going to get my brush out and I'm just going to quickly paint away the effect which I've done because I now have the color that I want. And I just want to make sure that I'm only affecting the very specific bits that I want. So I'm going to change my color back to the white by pushing X. It is a shortcut to getting your colors which are over here. So you've got your white and your black. I'm not sure whether I covered that a moment ago because this is the second attempt at doing this because I stuffed up the first video. I've lost track of what I have and haven't said. But effectively, if I haven't already said it, these are two colors which you can set, which you can then switch between. It's a nice quick shortcut of doing things. So making sure that we have the white selected, I'm going to come in, I'm going to very specifically paint in the area here that I want. Now I've just noticed something which I'll have to explain to you in a second. The tools which I was using, the brushes from the previous video that I was using the opacity. So my brush wasn't working at full strength, so the effect that I've done has not been done to the state that I thought it was because it wasn't fully visible. That can be fixed very shortly. So I'm going to come through, I'm going to make sure that the area that I'm painting in is the area that I want. Again, the more time you spend on this, the better it will look. So we're going to zoom back out, and you're going to notice that the eyes are very, very blue. The reason why they are like that is because the brush that I used when I did my adjustments wasn't at full strength. So we're going to come back to the area of the hue saturation. I've just double clicked on it and it's brought it up. So whilst we have these colors here, it's quite bright and we don't want it to be that bright. So I'm going to grab this saturation tool. I'm going to bring the saturation tool down until it has reached a point which is more appropriate, which is probably around that, I would say. So if we turn the layer on and off that we've just created, you can see that we've changed the color of the eyes on the snow leopard. The next thing that I want to do is focus on increasing the detail within the areas around here so that the fur on this section here looks a little bit more like the fur around here. Now, you'll notice before, the way that we did the eyes, we called the layer a screen layer, effectively meaning that it is brightening the area. What I want to do on this one is the opposite. I want to darken the fur. So I'm going to click on the original base layer. I'm going to say duplicate layer. I'm going to call this one fur. And where we have the selection, the layer type, I'm going to go from normal. I'm going to call it multiply. And you'll notice that it makes the whole image a lot darker. So again, we're going to create a mask layer. We're going to come down to the little tool here which says add layer mask. I'm going to invert that by pressing Command and I. And with my brush tool, I'm going to come up to the brush area. I'm going to choose a very soft brush, and I'm going to choose a bigger brush because that's quite small. Now, if you use the bracket tools again, you can increase the size. And we're going to just go through and we're going to paint in these areas that we want to be darker. Again, this is one of those things that you can be very specific about, or you can not be very specific about it. Now, you'll notice this area over here is getting quite dark, and we don't want the brush to be doing its effect quite as severely. So I'm going to push the X button, which will change my color over here. I can just use these little arrows. I'm just going to undo, just unpaint that area that I want, because I don't want the effect that I'm about to do to be as intense as it was over here. So I'm going to grab up near my brush tool where it says the opacity. Effectively, what this does is change the strength of the brush. So we're going to bring that down to about 50%, which leaves you with a little bit more play so that you can do a little bit more finer details when you're doing this. I'm going to change my paint color back to white because I want to make this section visible. I'm just going to paint in using my brush, seeing as it's using it as an opacity, not as the full brush. I can do multiple layers in certain sections to get more detail in areas that I want. Now, keep in mind, if you overdo something, you can go back and you can undo it at a later date. This area here on the nose, I believe, and this area here now have a little bit too much. So if we change our paint layer back to the black layer to turn things away, and we're going to come up to the opacity, I'm going to turn it down even further so I've got more room to play. I can then just slowly click away and make it so that it's a little bit better in the areas that I want. Now, we've done this, and you can see that the effect that it's had on all of the fur. Again, I don't want this layer to be this intense. So I'm going to come to the layer section here, and I'm going to slowly decrease the layer until it's to a point that I think's a little bit better. So we'll just leave it again, we'll say 50%. If we turn this layer on and off, you'll see the difference that it's made to the entire image. Okay, so now that we've done the fur and we've given it the effect that we want there, I'm going to do a basic overall curves adjustment to this photo to just give it a little bit more contrast so that it looks a little bit more impact with the photo. So I want this curves adjustment to be at the very top of the hierarchy of layers. So I'm going to click on photo filter so that it goes above that filter. I'm going to click new curves adjustment, and we're going to increase the darks a fair bit more than that. Bring the lights up, and effectively that's where we're going to leave this image for the moment. I'm going to save this image, and we're going to come back in the next video, and we're going to look at how we cut out this image and we can import it into another image so that you can get that composite look with a different background. We'll then look at adding the snow effect to it, and we'll step from there and get it to that point that was looking something similar to the one I've previously done. Now, of course, it's not going to look quite as effective as the one that I've done previously because I spent a few hours doing that, and we're trying to do this in a tutorial. So there's going to be a good overview of how to do it, but you'll have to obviously spend a lot more time refining the photo from there. So stay tuned for the next video, and we'll go from there, and we'll show you how to take a photo which you've edited to this point to a point where that you can start to further increase the effects of the image. I'm Ben McCallum, and I hope we'll see you with the next video soon.